People often ask me, if God created the universe, then who created God? It sounds like a clever question, doesn't it? But I smile because hidden inside it is a mistake so deep that it reveals something profound about the way we think. You see, we humans are addicted to beginnings. We want every story to start somewhere, every cause to have a cause before it. But what if existence itself has no first chapter? What if the author has always been writing? In this conversation, I will not speak of a God in human form, nor deny the mystery that gave birth to existence. I will show you how logic, pure, unflinching logic, leads us to a reality beyond beginnings and ends. You will see why the question, who created God, cannot be answered not because it's too big, but because it's built on a hidden illusion that time and cause existed before everything else. Together, we will dismantle that illusion. You will discover what I came to believe, that the divine is not an object within the universe, but the order through which the universe exists. And once you understand that, the question of who created God will dissolve into something even more astonishing, the realization that the universe itself may be the expression of consciousness, eternal and self-existent. I understand why this question haunts so many minds. It haunted mine too. You see, we live in a world of beginnings. Children are born, stars ignite, thoughts emerge. Everything seems to come from something else. So when we hear that God made the universe, we naturally ask, then who made God? But this question only makes sense if we assume that God exists inside time, that he must wait for a cause the same way the sun waits for dawn. I once thought that way, until I realized that the laws of the universe themselves are timeless. The speed of light, the curvature of space, they do not evolve from other things, they simply are. And if even one law of nature can exist beyond time, then what of the totality from which all laws flow? What if the divine is not a person, but the unbroken logic of existence, the eternal principle by which all things unfold? Most people are afraid to think in this way, because it removes the comfort of imagining God as an authority outside us. But I tell you, this way of seeing does not diminish God. It reveals a deeper one, a God who is not apart from the universe, but the universe made aware of itself. So today, we will follow a single thread, one question that has echoed since the dawn of thought. If God made everything, who made God? To answer it, we must step outside the usual boundaries of religion and science, and see both as expressions of the same human longing to understand. First, we will examine why the question feels so compelling, what it reveals about the way our minds are wired to think in terms of cause and effect. Then, we will explore how modern physics, from relativity to the unity of natural law, shows that not all things require a beginning. Finally, we will turn inward and ask, what does it mean to speak of God at all? Is it a being, a consciousness, a law, or the very ground of being itself? I will share with you what I discovered after a lifetime of inquiry, that the divine is not something that began, but something that always is. And perhaps, when we finish, you will see that the question, who made God, was never about God at all. It was about us, about our fear of infinity, and our longing to make the eternal feel small enough to hold. Here's something most people completely miss when they ask, if God made everything, who made God? The question sounds intelligent, even profound. It feels like it cuts straight to the core of the universe's mystery. But hidden inside that question is a quiet trap, a blind spot in the way the human mind thinks about beginnings and causes. And once you see that trap clearly, you can't unsee it. It changes the way you understand not only God, but existence itself. You see, the human brain is a pattern-making machine. We've spent millions of years looking for cause and effect. Thunder must come from clouds, fire must come from spark, life must come from seed. This habit of thought has kept us alive. It's what allows us to build, plan, and predict. But the same logic that helps us survive within the world becomes a wall when we try to understand the origin of the world. Because our minds live inside time, we assume everything else must too. Think about it. Everything we know begins and ends. A river starts at a spring and ends at the sea. A story begins on the first page and ends with the last word. Even love, the most eternal thing we feel, seems to have a start, a glance, a heartbeat, a meeting. So naturally, when we imagine God, we imagine a being who must have started somewhere, somewhen, somehow. We can't help ourselves. Our minds are built to think in lines, but existence may be written in circles. Let's pause and picture this. Imagine a fish that has spent its entire life underwater. The water is all it has ever known. It moves through it, breathes through it, sees through it. One day, another fish tells it about something called dry land. But the first fish can't imagine it. It keeps asking, "Yes, but what ocean is this dry land in?" Do you see the problem? The fish can't conceive of something outside of water, because water defines its world. In the same way, we can't easily conceive of something outside of time, because time defines our world. So when someone asks, "Who made God?" they're asking as if God were a thing, as if God were an event inside time, like the birth of a star or the invention of fire. But what if God isn't an event? What if God is the condition that allows any event to happen at all? The foundation, not a piece of the building, the space in which time unfolds, not something that unfolds within it. Once you think that way, you see why the question begins to collapse under its own weight. I used to wrestle with this same dilemma when I was younger. I wanted to trace every effect back to its cause, like links in a chain. But the deeper I went, the more I realized the chain had no beginning, not because something was missing, but because the idea of a first link was meaningless. Every link only exists because of its connection to the others. You can't pull one out and say, "Here it starts." Reality is a web, not a line. Now, I know what you might be thinking. But Albert, everything has to come from somewhere. How can anything simply exist without a start? I understand that feeling. It's almost instinct. But that instinct belongs to creatures living inside the flow of time. The moment we step outside of time, even in thought, before and after, lose their meaning. There is no before light if light defines time itself. The cause of all causes can't be measured by the rules of what it created. In science, I saw this same paradox appear in a different form. When we study motion, we use time as the backdrop to measure change. But what happens when we ask, where did time come from? We can't measure it with itself. That's the same trap hidden in "Who made God?" We're trying to apply the logic of cause and effect to something that, by definition, exists before cause and effect. It's like trying to weigh the concept of weight or to draw the edge of a circle. This is why, when people asked me whether I believed in God, I always hesitated to answer with yes or no, because both of those words are too small for the question. The God of my understanding wasn't a being sitting within time, waiting to be created. It was the order that made time possible, the reason that reason itself exists. Not the spark that starts the fire, but the law that allows sparks to ignite. And this, my friend, is where most arguments between science and religion fall apart. They're not really disagreeing about existence, they're disagreeing about perspective. Religion asks who, science asks how, but the truth is larger than both questions. God is not a who or a how. God is the that which is, the beingness itself, the silent foundation under every why. Once you see this, the question, "Who made God?" begins to sound like a riddle the mind created to trap itself. It's clever, but it's built on an invisible assumption that everything, even the ultimate, must follow the rules of time and sequence. But tell me, if time itself was born from the universe, what clock was ticking before the first second? The mistake, I realized, is not in the question's curiosity but in its direction. The question looks backward, but the truth is not behind us, it's beneath us, within us, all around us. The universe is not a chain of causes stretching into the past. It's an eternal field that simply is. And what we call God may just be that field becoming aware of itself through minds like ours that dare to ask impossible questions. So the next time someone asks you, "Who made God?" you might answer as I do, with a smile. Because that question, in trying to outsmart faith, actually points towards something far greater. The realization that the foundation of existence needs no foundation. It is the foundation. What I'm about to share might seem counterintuitive at first, but once it sinks in, it changes everything. The question, "Who made God?" doesn't just fail to find an answer, it quietly cancels itself out. It's a self-defeating question, a logical boomerang that collapses the very moment it's thrown. Because when you stop and think about it carefully, you realize that the question demands something impossible, a cause for something that, by definition, cannot have one. You see, when we use the word God, we're not simply describing another thing in the universe like a planet or a star or a force. We're talking about the reason the universe exists at all. The word God, as it has been used by philosophers and mystics for centuries, refers to something timeless, self-existent, uncaused, the ground of being itself. So to ask, who made God, is like asking, what's north of the North Pole? The question looks meaningful until you realize it breaks the very geometry it tries to use. You can travel north only until you reach the pole. Beyond that, north doesn't exist. In the same way, you can talk about causes and creators only within the boundaries of time. Beyond that, before and after, no longer apply. I think many people cling to this question because it feels rebellious. It sounds like the one question that could unseat every faith. But rebellion without reflection is just noise. The question, who made God, doesn't reveal a flaw in the idea of God. It reveals the limits of the human frame of reference. We think in sequences because we live in them. We cannot help but imagine the eternal as an event, the infinite as a really big number, the timeless as something that just lasts forever. But eternity doesn't last. It doesn't move. It doesn't wait. It simply is. I used to sit late at night in my small apartment in Bern, surrounded by half-finished notes and equations, staring at the clock on the wall. Its steady ticking was hypnotic. Each tick a tiny declaration of time's dominion. Before, after, cause, effect. Yet even then, I could feel that something about that rhythm wasn't ultimate. The tick and the tock are only meaningful if there's a background against which they happen, a stillness that doesn't move while everything else does. That stillness, I came to realize, is the true mystery. It is the silent canvas on which time paints its motion. If God exists, he must exist in that silence, not in the ticking. Now, some will say, but Einstein, you're just redefining God to avoid the question. And I understand why that sounds clever, but in truth, it's not an evasion, it's precision. If you define God as a being inside time, then yes, the question, who made God, would make sense. But that definition is already too small. It turns the infinite into a character, a creature among creatures. It's like calling the ocean a large puddle. It might look similar, but it misses the essence entirely. The ocean is not simply more water, it's an entirely different reality. The divine is not a thing with boundaries, it's the reason boundaries exist. Imagine asking, what color is sound? Or, where does space go when it ends? These are not profound questions, they are category errors. They mix frameworks that cannot overlap. And yet, much of human reasoning about God is built on that same confusion. We keep trying to fit the eternal into the shape of the temporal, like forcing the horizon into a bottle. And then, when it doesn't fit, we assume the horizon must not exist. In my work as a scientist, I learned early that a contradiction is not the same as a mystery. A contradiction tells you that your framework is wrong. When the math gives you infinity where it shouldn't, it's not the universe that's broken, it's your assumption. The same applies here. The idea that God must have a cause is like dividing by zero. It produces nonsense, not because reality is nonsense, but because we've used the wrong operation. If God is the ultimate ground of being, then he cannot be caused, because cause and effect exist within being. It would be like asking, what's outside of everything? The question itself dissolves under the weight of its own paradox. Let me offer you another image, one that has stayed with me for years. Picture a perfect circle drawn in the sand. You can trace your finger along its edge forever and never find the place where it starts or ends. Every point is connected. Every point depends on the rest. The circle is self-contained. It exists by its own geometry. Asking where it begins is not a question about the circle. It's a misunderstanding of what a circle is. The same is true for the divine. The moment you understand that the totality of existence is self-contained, the question of beginnings loses its meaning. But here's the irony: even though the question is flawed, it points towards something profound. It reveals the human hunger for origin, for explanation, for grounding. That hunger is not wrong. It's holy. It's the universe's curiosity awakening within us. Every time someone asks, who made God? They are unknowingly expressing the same longing that drives all of science and philosophy, the longing to know what it means for something to be. And while the question can't be answered in the form it takes, the impulse behind it can be fulfilled. You fulfill it not by chasing a first cause, but by awakening to the fact that you're part of the reality that needs no cause. The same order that holds galaxies in their paths holds your heartbeat steady in your chest. You are not standing outside the circle. Looking in, you are a curve of it, a momentary expression of its perfection. The divine is not something you can step away from to analyze. It is the act of stepping, the space that allows stepping to occur, the awareness that knows the step has been taken. So, when I say the question, "Who made God?" breaks its own rules, I don't mean it is foolish. I mean it is sacred in disguise. It is the mind's final attempt to understand itself before surrendering to the mystery it came from. Once you realize that, you stop demanding that the infinite explain itself in finite terms. You stop asking, "Who made God?" and start asking, "What is it within me that longs to know?" That shift, from analysis to awe, is the beginning of wisdom. And perhaps that is where logic and reverence finally meet. Not in an answer, but in the realization that the very structure of reality is self-explaining. It doesn't need a maker because it is the making, unfolding endlessly through time and space. What we call God is not trapped inside the question. The question itself lives within God. And once you see that, you understand why I no longer ask, "Who made God?" I ask instead, "Who is it that keeps asking?" There's a strange kind of humility that comes when you begin to see time not as something absolute, but as something that bends, stretches, and even stops under the right conditions. When I was a young man walking through the streets of Bern, I often found myself daydreaming about light. I would ask myself, what would it be like to chase a beam of light? What would the world look like if I could catch up to it? That question haunted me for years. I couldn't shake it, because somewhere deep down, I sensed that light wasn't just another phenomenon. It was the key to everything. I had no idea that question would one day change the way humanity understood time itself, or that it would bring me closer to a way of thinking about God that no theology or scripture had ever quite captured. You see, when we talk about light, we're not just talking about brightness. We're talking about the one constant in a universe that never stops changing. Everything else, motion, matter, space, energy, shifts depending on how you look at it. But light, in its speed, in its essence, remains the same. To move at the speed of light is to step outside the flow of time altogether. For a photon, the particle of light itself, there is no journey between one point and another. The moment it leaves a star and the moment it touches your skin are one and the same. From its perspective, there was never any before or after, only a continuous, eternal now. When I first grasped this, it was as if someone had quietly opened a door inside my mind. It meant that time this great river in which we live and measure our lives was not universal. It was relative. It was woven together with space into a single fabric, and that fabric could twist, fold, and slow depending on one's movement through it. But light was different. Light did not flow within that fabric, it defined it. It was the thread itself. And so, I began to realize that at the foundation of reality, there must exist something that does not age, something that does not wait, something that does not unfold step by step. If light experiences no passage of time, then in a way, every beam of sunlight that warms your face has existed eternally. The moment it was emitted and the moment it arrived are the same instant viewed from different perspectives. Think of that. The light from a distant star, traveling for billions of years before reaching us, experiences that entire journey in no time at all. To the light itself, the universe is not ancient, it is immediate. There is no past and no future. There is only now. And so, I began to wonder, what if the divine is not somewhere in the past, creating things one after another, like a craftsman at work, but something like light itself, existing beyond time, illuminating everything from within? What if God is not an event at the beginning of time, but the timeless presence that allows time to exist at all? The question, "Who made God?" suddenly feels misplaced in this context, because once you stand at the edge of light's perspective, you see that before is a human invention, a useful illusion inside the slower world of matter and memory. Outside of it, there is no before, there is no beginning, there is only being. I like to think that the universe, in its quiet way, has always been trying to teach us this lesson. Every sunrise is a reminder that what we call a new day is not something new to the light itself. The light that greets us every morning is ancient, ageless, indifferent to the ticking of clocks. The sun may burn, the earth may spin, but the light remains. It carries no shadow of yesterday, no worry for tomorrow. It is pure presence, and that, perhaps, is the most divine quality of all. It's difficult for the human mind to accept this because we are creatures of sequence. We measure everything in moments. We define ourselves by what came before and what comes next. But imagine, for a moment, that you could step out of that sequence. Imagine that time were not something that carries you forward like a river, but something that arises within you, like ripples in a pond, stirred by your own awareness. You would no longer see creation as something that happened once long ago, but as something that is happening everywhere, all the time, eternally. You would see that existence is not a story unfolding, it is the canvas on which all stories are painted at once. Light shows us this because it transcends the very limits we use to define everything else. It is constant, unchanging, and yet endlessly expressive. It illuminates everything without effort and without attachment. In that sense, light is not just a metaphor for God, it is a clue to the nature of divinity itself. When the ancient scriptures spoke of "let there be light," perhaps they were not describing the first moment of creation, but the eternal act of awareness itself. To let there be light is to let there be knowing, seeing, being. If there is something divine in this universe, it is not something that happens before the Big Bang or after the end of time. It is what allows any of those phrases to mean anything at all. It is the constant presence that illuminates every event, every atom, every thought, the way light illuminates a landscape. And once you see it this way, you realize that to ask, "Who made God?" is like asking, "Who made light?" The question assumes a darkness that may never have existed. When I stand under the night sky and look at the stars, I sometimes imagine that the light reaching me is not just a signal from the past, but a touch from eternity. Each photon that brushes my eyes is an eternal traveler that has never aged, never waited, never remembered. It carries no burden of time. And I think perhaps that's what God feels like. Not a distant ruler watching from beyond the heavens, but an endless presence that never needed to begin, because it has never stopped being. That is why I've come to believe that the divine is not something you find at the beginning of the universe, but something you find at the foundation of awareness itself. A timeless illumination that does not travel through time but gives time its meaning. Light doesn't need a source outside of itself to be what it is. It only needs to shine. And in that endless shining, there is the answer we've been searching for all along. Here's something that may sound strange at first, but it's one of the most liberating realizations I ever came to. The universe may not have a beginning in the way we imagine. People often picture the cosmos as a vast firework that went off once the Big Bang, flinging matter and light into the void. They imagine a spark, a first moment, a before and after. But this way of thinking is shaped by our daily experience of time. We are born, we live, we die. We start and finish tasks, days, relationships, lives. So when we look outward and see the immensity of the cosmos, we project that same structure onto it. We assume that the universe too must have been born, but this is a trick of perception. It's as if a wave tried to imagine the ocean beginning at its own crest. When we trace the expansion of the universe backward, we eventually reach a limit, a moment when matter was so dense, so compressed, that our equations break down. We call that boundary the Big Bang, but what it really marks is the horizon of our understanding. It's the point where time, as we know it, ceases to be meaningful. Asking what came before that moment is like asking what lies north of the North Pole. There is no before because time itself begins with that event. The universe doesn't exist in time. Time exists within the universe. And this is where logic begins to turn into wonder. Because if time is not fundamental, then creation is not a moment. It's a condition. It's not something that happened once long ago, but something that is happening right now, everywhere, in every atom and every thought. I remember once reading how people imagined the universe expanding into empty space. They pictured galaxies moving outward, filling a cosmic void. But that's not quite right. Space itself is expanding. There's no outside for it to expand into. The universe is not growing in a place. It's creating place as it grows. Time is not ticking somewhere beyond it. It's being woven into existence with every movement of matter and energy. That means that even this moment, as you hear my words, is not separated from the beginning of all things. You are standing on the same fabric that has been unfolding since what we call the beginning. You are a wave in that same ocean, not separate from its origin, but a continuation of it. Think about that for a moment. When you look up at the stars, you are seeing the past light that began its journey millions or billions of years ago. But from the universe's point of view, that light is still now. The past is not gone. The future is not yet. They are all part of the same continuous tapestry. The universe does not remember its birth because it is still being born. Every sunrise, every heartbeat, every act of love is a local expression of that eternal creation. The divine is not the one who pushed the first domino. It is the ongoing falling of every domino that ever will be. And this, I think, is where people misunderstand the word eternal. We hear eternal and imagine endless time, an infinite sequence stretching forever into the future. But eternity has nothing to do with duration. Eternity is outside duration. It's not a lot of time. It's the condition in which time exists at all. To say that God is eternal is not to say that God lasts forever. It's to say that God is the reality in which forever becomes possible. The universe may have an age, but the being from which it arises, the law, the principle, the awareness does not. It doesn't start. It doesn't wait. It simply is. In my years of studying physics, I came to see that every equation describing motion, energy, and space has one thing in common. It requires something constant. You can't measure change without a reference point that itself doesn't change. In our universe, that constant is the speed of light. But beyond physics, the same principle applies. For there to be transformation, there must be something unchanging beneath it, a ground, a stillness, a truth. Call it nature, call it God, call it the order of existence itself. It is the foundation that allows all motion to have meaning. When people ask me if I believe in creation, I tell them, yes, but not as an event, as a state of being. Creation is not what happened then, it's what's happening now. The laws that govern the birth of stars are the same laws that shape your thoughts, your loves, your fears. The energy that fuels the galaxies also fuels your cells. You are not living in a universe that was created once upon a time. You are part of a universe that is perpetually creating itself. You are not witnessing a story that began and will someday end. You are living inside a sentence that has no period, only breath. To me, this view is far more awe-inspiring than the idea of a single moment of creation, because it means that existence is not a completed work, but a living process. The divine isn't an engineer who built the machine and walked away. It's the pulse that keeps the machine alive. The Big Bang was not a firework that went off once. It's the continuing act of expansion, the continuous vibration that gives rise to everything. You are not watching the afterglow of an ancient event, you are participating in the event itself. I sometimes think of it like music. The universe is not a song that started long ago and is now winding down. It's a melody that is always being composed, note by note, moment by moment. You, I, the stars, the galaxies, we are the notes. We come into being, we fade, but the music continues. The composer is not sitting outside, plucking strings. The composer is the music itself. The question, who made God, makes as little sense as asking, who made the melody? The melody doesn't need a maker separate from itself. It exists because sound exists, and sound exists because vibration exists, and vibration exists because being itself cannot help but sing. When you start to see creation this way, everything changes. You stop looking for an origin and start listening for a rhythm. You stop chasing the past and begin to live in the unfolding present. You stop asking, why did it begin? And start asking, what is it becoming? And that, I think, is a far better question, not who made God, but how is God expressing itself now? Because when you look closely, you realize that creation was never something that happened. It's something that is happening, and you are part of it. There comes a moment in every seeker's life, scientist or philosopher, believer or skeptic, when you finally stop asking, what started it all? And begin to realize that there may never have been a start at all, only a pattern so complete, so self-consistent, that it doesn't need one. The universe, it turns out, is not a machine built and set in motion by some distant clockmaker. It is more like an endless equation, perfectly balanced, perfectly self-contained, expressing itself through countless variations, yet never stepping outside its own harmony. The law that governs it, the deep order that holds it together, does not begin or end. It simply is. When I first began to understand this, it was through the language of physics. I was fascinated by one principle above all others, the conservation of energy. You see, energy cannot be created or destroyed. It only changes form. It becomes matter, it becomes motion, it becomes heat or light or thought, but never once does it cease to be. It's eternal, shapeless, and indestructible. The same energy that burned in the first stars still flows through you now, animating your cells, igniting your thoughts, driving your heartbeat. Every breath you take, every word you speak, every idea that flickers in your mind, all of it is energy in motion. The same cosmic current that has been flowing since the beginning, if beginning is even the right word. That realization left me breathless, because if energy cannot be created or destroyed, then creation itself is not the emergence of something from nothing. It's the transformation of what always was into what now is. The divine, if it exists, is not the cause of that transformation. It is the transformation, the process itself, the law that allows existence to take on form. The question, who made God, dissolves in the face of this understanding. For the God we seek is not a person in the sky pulling levers, but the eternal principle that ensures that nothing ever truly vanishes. Death, loss, decay, they are not endings but reconfigurations. The universe recycles itself endlessly, not because it must, but because that is its nature. It is infinite play, infinite recombination, infinite self-expression. To grasp this, you have to let go of the idea of beginnings entirely. Imagine standing before a great ocean. Waves rise, curl, and crash against the shore. You could ask, which wave began the sea? But the question makes no sense. The waves are not separate from the ocean. They are the ocean. They are its rhythm made visible, its motion made tangible. The law that governs their rise and fall is not something added to the water. It is the very nature of water itself. In the same way, the laws of the universe are not something imposed upon it from outside. They are the universe's nature expressing itself through order. God is not the author of the law. God is the law, the coherence, the unity, the principle by which chaos becomes cosmos. I once said, God does not play dice, and many misunderstood me. They thought I meant that everything is predictable, that there is no room for chance. But what I really meant was this: the universe is not random. Beneath all apparent disorder lies an intelligible structure, an underlying rationality. Even when we cannot see it, even when events seem senseless, they are still part of the deeper symmetry. This, to me, is what divinity means, not a being that chooses, but a harmony that simply is. Consider how this harmony appears in the smallest things. The orbit of planets, the structure of crystals, the spiral of a seashell, the rhythm of your heartbeat, all obey the same mathematical patterns, the same physical constants. The ratio that defines the curve of a galaxy is the same that defines the spiral of a sunflower. The equation that describes the bending of light is the same one that explains how time slows as you approach the speed of light. There is no place in the universe where these laws do not apply, no boundary where order gives way to chaos completely. And that is astonishing, because it means that the same intelligence that governs the cosmos also governs you. You are not a visitor here, you are the universe knowing itself through a particular pattern of energy and awareness. If that is true, then to understand yourself is to understand creation. And to understand creation is to glimpse something of God. But this God needs no beginning, no origin story, no divine engineer to construct it. It exists the way a melody exists, not as a thing, but as a relationship between things, a pattern sustained by its own coherence. You cannot point to the start of the melody and say, there is where music began. Music arises whenever vibration finds harmony. In the same way, existence arises whenever being finds expression. It's not an event, but a constant process, an eternal becoming grounded in an eternal law. Some people find this idea unsettling. They want a creator to stand apart from the creation, a mind to intend it, a purpose to design it. But I've always found the opposite idea far more beautiful, that the creation is the creator, that being itself is sacred, that the law and the love that sustain the cosmos are not external authorities, but intrinsic qualities. The divine doesn't command the stars to move, it moves as the stars. It doesn't tell your heart to beat, it beats as your heart. It doesn't whisper through prophets, it speaks through the wind, the tide, the pulse of thought. The miracle is not that something once made the universe. The miracle is that the universe never stops making itself. When you truly see this, even for a moment, you stop needing to explain the mystery, because you realize you're standing inside it. You realize that asking, "Who made God?" is like asking, "Who made existence?" It assumes a separation that isn't there. Existence does not need to be made. It is the canvas, not the painting, the silence from which sound arises, not the sound itself. And once you understand that, you begin to feel an almost unbearable sense of wonder, not the kind of wonder that demands answers, but the kind that bows before the beauty of what simply is. So, when I look at the stars, I no longer see them as distant fires scattered through the void. I see them as notes in a single chord, expressions of one great harmony that has never begun and will never end. And I think to myself, perhaps this is what the ancients meant when they spoke of God as eternal, unchanging, self-sufficient. Perhaps they were pointing to the same truth that science now reveals, that beneath all movement there is stillness, beneath all change there is constancy, beneath all form there is law. And that law, that order, that infinite coherence is not something that exists in the universe. It is the universe. It is the heartbeat of reality itself, and it never needed to begin because it has never stopped being. Here's the part that most people never pause long enough to consider. The very act of asking why is already an echo of the divine. It's the universe's own curiosity, wearing the mask of your mind. From the moment we learn to speak, we begin to ask questions that reach beyond our understanding, questions about beginnings, endings, meaning, and purpose. And as I grew older, I came to realize that this impulse to question is not merely a human habit or an intellectual game. It is the signature of something far deeper, the consciousness of the cosmos recognizing itself through us. Every time you look at the stars and feel that quiet tug in your chest, that mixture of awe and longing, that is not your mind being small. It is infinity remembering itself. When I first began studying physics, I thought of my curiosity as something personal, as if I were a mind inside the universe, trying to decode what lies outside. But as my understanding deepened, that boundary began to blur. I started to sense that my thoughts, my intuitions, my sudden insights were not mine at all in the possessive sense. They were more like waves rising and falling on a vast sea of awareness. I was not observing the universe from a distance. I was the universe looking at itself through human eyes. Every equation I wrote, every idea that emerged from stillness was part of that same movement, the cosmos, unfolding its own logic in the language of mind. You can sense this in your own life too, if you listen closely enough. Have you ever had a thought or an inspiration that felt as though it arrived from nowhere? A sudden knowing that seemed to bypass effort entirely? In those moments, you are not receiving information from outside. You are touching the same intelligence that governs the stars. The same order that organizes galaxies also organizes thought. And that, to me, is one of the most profound realizations a human being can have. That consciousness is not an accident of biology, but an expression of the universe's very fabric. It is not something the brain produces like a factory. It is something the universe experiences through the brain, much like music experienced through an instrument. To think of consciousness this way is to see that our capacity for wonder is not incidental, it is essential. It's how the universe contemplates its own mystery. The mind seeks the infinite because it is the infinite, temporarily playing the role of the finite. You, sitting here, listening to these words, thinking your thoughts, are the cosmos narrowing its focus just enough to experience itself as you. And when you look back at the cosmos in wonder, the loop completes the universe, becomes aware of its own awareness. It's a perfect symmetry, a reflection within a reflection. I used to believe that our species was defined by intelligence, by our ability to reason, to analyze, to build tools and solve problems. But over time, I saw that what truly defines us is not our reasoning but our reverence. The ability to feel awe, to sense something vast and unknowable beyond ourselves, is not a weakness of the mind but its highest function. It is the recognition that we are not separate from the mystery we study. The physicist, who stands before a blackboard filled with equations, and the child who stands before the sea are both participating in the same act, the act of communion. One uses numbers, the other silence, but the feeling is the same. Both are drawn by the gravity of the infinite. I remember one night, long after midnight, working alone under a flickering lamp. The equations I had been struggling with refused to cooperate. They seemed to twist out of meaning, mocking my effort. Frustrated, I looked up and caught sight of the stars through the window. In that moment, I stopped thinking and simply looked. The silence that followed was enormous. And then, something shifted. The problem I had been wrestling with seemed to solve itself, not because I found an answer, but because I stopped demanding one. I realized that my mind was not separate from the problem. It was the problem. The way a wave is not separate from the ocean, but an expression of it. That insight didn't come as words or logic, it came as a feeling, a deep knowing that the universe thinks through us, not for us. That, I think, is the real meaning of intelligence, not the accumulation of facts, but the participation in the cosmic flow of understanding. The mind that seeks the infinite is like a river that eventually discovers it was never separate from the sea. It begins its journey thinking it's alone, confined by its banks, but when it reaches the ocean, it realizes it was water all along. The journey was never about reaching the infinite, it was about remembering that we were never apart from it. And this is why the question, who made God, becomes, at its deepest level, a mirror. It's not the universe asking who created it, it's the universe asking why it forgot that it creates itself. Every question of origin is really a question of identity. When you ask, where did this all come from? What you're really asking is, what am I? And the answer, once you stop looking outward and start feeling inward, is always the same. I am that which asks. Perhaps this is what the mystics have always meant when they spoke of divine union, and what I, as a scientist, tried to describe in equations. The infinite doesn't stand apart from the finite, it breathes through it. The eternal doesn't look down upon time, it unfolds as time. God is not outside consciousness. God is consciousness, exploring itself through the endless play of forms. And every moment of curiosity, every spark of wonder, every why that rises in your heart, is the infinite, reaching out to itself, whispering across the vastness, remember who you are. There is something deeply sacred about imagination, though we seldom treat it that way. People often think of imagination as a kind of play, a child's escape from reality, a dreamer's indulgence. But for me, imagination was never a retreat from the world. It was the bridge between what is and what could be. It was the invisible field through which the unseen speaks to the seen. Every discovery I ever made began not with calculation, but with a picture, a mental image, a vision that felt truer than logic. I would close my eyes and see light bending, clocks slowing, space curving. I could feel equations before I wrote them. I used to say that imagination is more important than knowledge, and I meant it because knowledge tells us what is, but imagination reveals what might be. Knowledge is a library. Imagination is the doorway that leads beyond its walls. When I look back on my life, I realize that the most profound moments of insight came when I stopped trying to force understanding and simply allowed myself to imagine. I would ask myself impossible questions, not to find immediate answers, but to awaken new ways of seeing. What would it be like to ride on a beam of light? What would happen if time itself could bend? What if gravity wasn't a force but a geometry? These questions had no precedent in textbooks. They were acts of creative faith, leaps into the unknown, guided by intuition rather than proof. And yet, those leaps led to truths that would later be verified by experiment. Imagination opened the door, logic merely walked through it. You see, imagination is the universe speaking through symbols. It's the language of possibility, the way consciousness translates infinity into forms that the human mind can grasp. Every metaphor, every dream, every artistic vision is a fragment of that larger dialogue. When you imagine, you're not merely creating fantasies, you are tuning into the frequency of creation itself. It's no coincidence that every culture has described divine revelation in the language of vision and dream. Prophets, poets, scientists, we all drink from the same well. What we call inspiration is simply resonance with that timeless source. I have often thought that perhaps the universe itself imagines. Look around you, every shape, every pattern, every color is an experiment in form, a test of beauty. Nature is not mechanical, it is playful. A flower doesn't need to be beautiful to function, and yet it is. The spiral of a galaxy, the symmetry of a snowflake, the shimmer of sunlight on water, all of these are expressions of an intelligence that creates not from necessity, but from joy. And we, as conscious beings, participate in that same act every time we dream, every time we create something new, every time we dare to wonder. In that moment, we are not imitating God, we are being God in motion, continuing the divine act of imagination that sustains existence. This is why I believe that imagination is not a luxury of the human mind, it is its highest function. It's what lifts us above instinct and habit. It's how we glimpse the eternal through the veil of the ordinary. When you imagine, you temporarily escape the boundaries of time and space. You step into the realm of the possible. In that realm, there are no beginnings or endings, only forms, shifting and evolving. The mind becomes a mirror for creation itself. You could say that imagination is the human form of divine seeing the way infinity looks at itself through finite eyes. And yet, society teaches us to distrust imagination. We are told to be practical, to cling to what's measurable, to worship the visible. But everything visible began as something invisible. Every law of physics was once an intuition. Every invention was once a dream. Even love, which shapes the destiny of worlds, cannot be seen. It must be imagined to be felt. So when people dismiss imagination as illusion, I smile. Because illusion, when pursued deeply enough, often turns out to be a higher truth. The imagination does not lie. It translates. It takes the infinite and renders it into images, just as light passes through a prism and becomes color. Once, when I was lost in thought about relativity, I found myself picturing a beam of light curving around the Sunday. I could see it as clearly as if it were in front of me, a golden thread bending through the darkness. That vision stayed with me for years. Then, in 1919, when the astronomers confirmed that light indeed bends around massive objects, I realized that imagination had seen what eyes could not yet see. In that moment, I felt something close to reverence. It was as if the universe had whispered its secret long before the instruments could measure it. That, to me, was a form of prayer not to a deity above, but to the mystery within. Imagination, then, is not the opposite of reason, but its companion. Reason is the map. Imagination is the compass. Reason shows us where we are. Imagination points to where we might go. Without imagination, reason becomes a cage. Without reason, imagination becomes chaos. But together, they create a harmony that echoes the structure of the cosmos itself, order and creativity dancing in perpetual union. The laws of physics are not rigid commands. They are invitations to explore. The universe doesn't limit imagination, it needs imagination to be known. I sometimes think that the divine speaks in images because images bypass the intellect. You don't analyze a sunset to feel its beauty. You surrender to it. The same is true for truth. The deepest truths cannot be proved. They can only be pictured. The mind that imagines God as an old man in the sky may be mistaken in form but not in spirit, for that image, however crude, is still an attempt to give shape to the formless. What matters is not the picture itself, but the fact that we can picture anything at all. The ability to imagine is the signature of consciousness, and consciousness is the signature of the divine. So when you close your eyes and dream, remember this: you are not escaping reality. You are communing with it. You are touching the part of existence that is endlessly creative, endlessly curious, endlessly alive. Every act of imagination, a thought, a poem, a melody, a theory, is a ripple in the same infinite ocean. And if you listen closely, you can almost hear it whispering back, through you, as you create, as I have created. Dream, as I dream. For imagination is not just the language of the divine, it is the divine speaking itself into being.